So welcome to another episode of All About Property. And today we're going to be talking about renting versus buying.
Good topic. I'm Tony.
And I'm Paul. So, Tony, what's your take on it?
It's an interesting conversation. If I think back many years ago, I'm showing my age now, but we were brought up, I think, to, leave school, go and earn some money, save extra hard for that deposit, as we spoke about, in the last podcast, or even get the famous 100% mortgages that were about, probably a little bit after. But I've bought a house and I've lived in rented, so I've seen both sides of the fence. And there are pitfalls of renting, but one thing's for sure with bricks and mortar, over time you would hope it gains value.
Certainly has done that for the last 50 years, that's for sure.
Absolutely, yeah.
yeah. Because I always used to think every 25 years you can probably put a naught on the end. And if you go back for the last 50 years, that's certainly to be true. I mean, my dad's first house was £1,500.
Right.
That same house today in the area he lived in is probably 450, 500 grand. It's over the long term it tends to be, because I think things are very different today compared to what they were when we were younger.
Definitely.
And the problem was, and I do remember this, I don't know if many people will know this, but I was homeless once, and trying to find something to rent in the 1980s was really difficult, whereas today it's really easy.
Was that because the landlord market wasn't really there?
It wasn't. It wasn't formed until after 1986, when the Housing Act changed and the Financial Services Act.
Yeah.
Then combination of the two together created the assured short-hold tenancies, and that really didn't gather pace until lenders started coming in, and that didn't come in until probably the sort of like middle to latter 90s.
Yeah.
So, and then that led the way for a bigger increase in rented accommodation. And I think, and this is my take on it, and I've never rented apart from rooms in my very early 20s, which were just dumps.
Yeah.
So I look at it, it's very convenient to rent today.
It is very convenient, in the respect of you haven't got to go through the hassle of selling it. If you want to sell it and move on and get something bigger, you can rent for 6 months. That's what a normal AST is.
Very transient market, isn't it?
Yeah. It is very easy to rent, as you say.
Yeah, flexible,
and flexible.
And I think it is easy, because if you find somewhere, and I do remember my daughter Zoe, when she rented her flat, she went and looked at it, and within 6-7 days she had the keys. So it was a nice, easy, simple process. So I can understand the attraction for renting. And then on top of that, you've got no maintenance bills. You've only got your usual utility bills, but you've got no maintenance bills which you would have if you purchased something.
Exactly that. You've got the flexibility of, if it's fully managed, which costs the landlord 10, 12, 14% of the monthly rent. So a lot of landlords don't want to do that because they keep the money in their pocket. But you can phone the management agent up if the tap starts leaking or something like that.
And regulations really tighten up on landlords now, and I think there was unfortunately, due to a few bad landlords, they're over cautious on stuff, and if there's any damp work or any problems, they're down the landlords like a ton of bricks nowadays. So I think if you're looking for convenience and you're looking for flexibility and you're looking for effectively no big commitments,
Yep.
renting's got the upper hand, hasn't it, really?
I think so. But then it has got the upper hand, but you want to make a home your home.
And that was going to come to my point, actually, which is there's no rights to tenure as a tenant.
No.
So
what is right to tenure, just for the people out there?
Rights to tenure is that you've got no rights to stay there.
Yeah.
If a landlord wants to sell it, off you go. See you later.
Yep.
So you've got no security, long-term security, whereas if you was purchasing, then you own that property, whether it's on a mortgage or whether you pay cash for it, you own it and you're responsible and you've got the rights to live there. So in that respect, that throws up a spanner in the works, doesn't it? So,
Definitely.
And I always equate it to, you've got a young daughter, my kids are a lot older than yours, but when they were looking to settle down,
Yeah.
I remember when Vicky first decided that she was going to live with her boyfriend, it was, I want to buy a house.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even in question in her mind, because she wanted to be she wanted her own destiny in her own hands. You know, so that's the thing. And whereas with renting accommodation, you don't get that.
You don't, but again, if two people get together, a friend of mine a couple of weeks ago, he's just moved in with his girlfriend, and they're doing it as a trial period to see whether they can live together before they go on to buy something.
So they're doing a little road test.
Yeah.
For want of a better word.
Cool, I'll tell you what, I think we should have done one of those a few times, but there we go. So it's a good thing, because obviously they've not taken that commitment in spending quite a bit of money. But what I can see the reason why they've done it is they've put two households into one, saving some money for that deposit. Hopefully it works out for them.
Yeah. So again, that's that flexibility comes in. You know, it's that, let's road test our relationship and check it out. And as long as I don't get stuck in the realms, because I think sometimes when I've seen it in the past, especially after 2008, and I think, and this is a big distinction to make, one of the reasons why the letting market really took off was when if anyone's aware of the financial crisis of 2008, where all of a sudden you had lenders wouldn't lend to people in the same way they did before, and they wanted a bigger deposit. So a lot of people got wiped out of being able to buy a house, and they were stuck. So they only had an opportunity to rent a property as opposed to buying one, because it was out of reach for them, because they needed a big deposit, and lending criteria is very tight. So people got stuck in that.
They did.
That thing, and because the rents were so expensive, they couldn't afford to save for a deposit. So you can get trapped into that flexibility if you're not careful. But as you said, your guys, two incomes coming into one home, and they're saving their deposit. As long as they do.
As long as they save it, because we all know what it's like. If we think we've got a bit of extra cash in the pocket, sometimes you spend it. But if you're doing it for that, doing it for that reason, be diligent with it.
But I've got this. I see. You've known me a long time, and I remember speaking to so many people. Buy a bloody house. You know, that was always my pushing someone. Don't care if you break your neck to buy it.
Yeah.
Go and buy a house. Now, it's difficult, right? Because we're sort of chewing the cud here about renting versus buying, and borrowing costs are going through the roof
all day.
And there must be people sitting there thinking, well, hang on a second, is it worth buying a house at the moment? You know, is it what's the upside for me if I buy a house?
The upsides, well, you're not wasting money, because what the average rent is now, if you think about cost of rent, about cost of mortgage, I'm not a mortgage advisor, nor are you, so we can't give people advice on that. But let's just say to rent a 2-bedroom house in Medway, Maidstone, in average condition, what we're looking, it's got to be £1,200 a month. Whereas you can go and buy a 2-bedroom house in Medway now for 200, 220, which is a Victorian house, which is probably the same year for rent. And I think maybe par for par.
They're not far away.
Not far away.
I think rent's probably got the upper hand at the moment. It's a little bit cheaper than it is to buy because rates have jumped a little bit. But overall, if they're not far away, then apart from the deposit and your costs of buying a house, certainly on a monthlies, it's going to be on par or The only thing is, obviously, when you're renting, you haven't got the additional costs of as we mentioned earlier, of repairs and maintenance and stuff like that. But and this is the way I look at it is, right? If you're paying rent, you'll inevitably be paying someone else's mortgage.
Absolutely.
That's what it comes down to, and you're never going to own it at the end. Even if you get a landlord that rents forever, you're never going to own it at the end, and you have no rights to tenure. But I'm always a great believer in having being in control of my life, and I think buying a house was always, in my mind, the way to go.
I agree.
And also, on top of that, if you'd have bought a house 5 years ago, you know it's gone up in value, which enables you to then consider moving on. I don't always look at it as some people do. They go, "I've made $100,000 on my house," because you haven't made anything really, unless you cash in and put the money in the bank.
But where are you going to live if you do that? You go into rented, and that money's swallowed up.
Exactly. So you don't actually make any money on a house. It's only monopoly money, and all you're going to do is buy a property, and you'll have a bigger deposit, which means you'll probably get more favourable rates when you move up market. And you've got that security of knowing, if you do need to borrow money, then you've got an asset to borrow against as well in the future. So there's something worth considering. Not I would recommend that, but you never know what life's going to throw at you.
No, exactly. But you've got to look at it as well as when you're renting. I'm looking at some pictures on the wall here. Yeah. Would you be able to do that if you're in a rented accommodation? I think you'll find you might have to phone the letting agent and...
I was just thinking, as you were saying that, just before you said that, I was thinking, but if you fancied a new kitchen, you couldn't just rip the kitchen out and start again. Well, the landlord might not mind you doing it, but it's not the sort of thing you would go and do if you rented a house. And I will say this, having fitted a few kitchens in my time, not actually me personally fitting them, but having new kitchens done in houses, it's a nice feeling to when you've done all the work on your house and it's nice and you have friends around and it's and you've got something that you've tangible that you can show people and you're proud of, So
well, you've worked hard for it and you paid for it.
Yeah.
And I remember you saying to me many years ago, you said, "Have you ever bought something outright against having finance on something, and which felt better?" Do you remember saying that? And it was buying something outright that you saved up for, and you got it done. But if you're going to put a new kitchen in the rental property, if the landlord allows you to, but which I'm sure they will, you're doing it for their benefit. So you're not really saved up for it.
It is funny because literally in the next day or so, my stepson and his girlfriend and the kids have lived here for the last 6 months while their house is being built, and they've got the keys. And I know that feeling when you pick the keys up and you're so excited, it's yours. And there's an excitement. And I mean, I remember when you done massive extension on your house. Do you remember that years ago?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember we came round and we had I think you had a barbecue or something, and it was a lovely place to be, and you was really proud of it, weren't you?
Yeah.
So it was. So there's something about that you can, and that's the other thing is if you buy wisely, and this is something really important. If you buy wisely, especially as a first time buyer, if you're gonna enter the market, always buy the best you can afford.
Yeah.
And I've always looked at houses and think, well, what can I do to it? If I had to, and I couldn't afford to move, but I could only afford to extend, what could I do to it? If you've got a house you can put an extension on, convert the loft or go on the side, if you've got a semi, you've always got that option to expand into that house as opposed to having to sell it and buy the next one. Yeah. And that's quite important, I think, because if, and that comes right back to what I was saying about rights to tenure. If you're a young couple, and you're looking to settle down and you're looking to start a family in the future, then if you've bought a house that you could possibly expand later, you've got that option as well as selling that and buying something else. So it gives you a lot more options once you've actually bought a house.
Definitely, maximising the footprint is always a good thing. It comes down to affordability at the end of the day. And when we're buying our first home, or even second home, it's we've got to watch this, we've got to watch that, because it's a big commitment and a big outlay. But again, you've got your own keys.
Yeah,
and
I
there's a
think
lot to be said for that.
And there's something about picking up a set of keys and owning something.
Yeah.
But I do get the flexibility of a transient market where, you know, like your friends are test driving their relationship, or if you're moving areas and you're going from, say, from south to north or north to south, and you don't know if that job's going to be for you, and you only want to, you know,
6 months.
you might have a contract for only 6 months or a year
Yeah.
with a firm, you know, because there's a lot more flexible working nowadays.
Yeah.
You want to check out whether you like the area or not, or whether you like the job or not. I can see why someone would want to rent for a short period, just to see if it was, you know, if it was that was achievable or not, you know.
Yeah, definitely. But the other thing about renting as well is, and I've always said this for a long time, yeah, you would say and like to think your mortgage or your rent is the biggest outlay that you've got in a monthly expenditure. I can never understand with the rental, and we talk about pitfalls, and I think the biggest pitfall is it doesn't go on your credit file.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so let's just say I'm renting a house off you. Yeah. That does not go on your credit file to say you've been paying your rent every...
Isn't it, because I don't know this for sure, so people need to check this, but a couple of agents, friends of mine, said that lenders were starting to look at, providing they had proof that they've been paying the rent, they can show it in their statements, and you've got a rental agreement and you've been there for, you know, a year or so or more, they would consider that as part of affordability.
I believe it's changing, but don't quote me, but if it's on your Equifax or your Clear
Yeah,
score...
it certainly doesn't build your credit score, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Again, when you come to buy something, okay, the lenders will look at affordability, but it doesn't show that payment's being made every month and show
whereas every other payment is registered.
Yeah, your mobile phone's on there, or whatever's on there, you know.
Yeah. Miss your rent, it doesn't matter.
No, and that's miss your mortgage for a few months, and you could be out.
Just one, it makes a difference on your credit file.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot to think about there on that, and I can see the upsides of renting. I can see the downsides, and I can see the upsides of buying. And we haven't talked about the downsides of buying yet, really. And I think that's something we need to sort of address, only because we're coming into a challenging market. Now, you're at the thick end of this, Tony. I mean, you're right at the sharp end, because you're selling houses for clients, and you're at that the coal face, so to speak. So, what happens if someone buys something and it drops in value?
I believe when you buy a property, if it's for investment, or you're buying to live in, an investment shouldn't be short term, because it's, as it said, it's an investment. I believe if you're buying for an investment, you should be looking at least 5 years plus for that investment.
Right, okay.
That's my own belief.
Right, okay.
They say property has a 10-year cycle. I think that's gone out the window.
Okay. We haven't seen a dip for 14 years, have we? Really? So
absolutely.
Why are you saying that? We did dip for a couple of years. So,
but then that was, I think, to do with that lovely word Brexit, where the market become a little bit stagnant and people didn't know where we were.
Values didn't really drop then, did they? They just stagnated, as you say, stagnant. And I think certainly we're seeing the indices. You know, that's Nationwide, Halifax, and Rightmove. They're reporting a 5% or 4.8% drop in the last 12 months, which must be a worry for someone who's thinking of buying a house. You know, because if they've saved their money up and they go and buy this house, and you know, within the first year it's gone down 5%. I mean, that must be. I mean, we remember the 90s when. As an agent in Walthamstow, East London, I remember the peak of the market was selling 2-bedroom flats at 60-65 grand. In fact, they probably peaked at higher than that. That's the real peak of the market. And then they went down to 50.
Yeah.
You know, they were really bad times. You know, people were in negative equity. They were just chucking the keys back. You'd like to think this time round, people are, you know, there's still. I think the average deposit, and this surprised me when I first looked at it. Do you know what the average first-time buyer's deposit is?
What now?
Yeah.
I'm probably going to say 15%.
Yeah, it's 18%.
Right, okay.
18%
Right.
overall, right? And I do remember back in the prior to 2008 and certainly prior to the early 90s, the average was 94%, a 6% deposit, you know, because you could easily get 95% and were easily available.
Yeah.
So and that's my point. Is if you're putting down 18%, you know, 15 to 20% deposit, and it goes down a small percentage, it's not going to make any difference unless you have to sell the house. And that's a big thing I think people need to be aware of.
Definitely.
Unless you're selling the house,
Yeah.
it makes no difference, because it could well go down and come back up again. And we don't know where it's going to be in a year, 2, 3 or 4 years' time. But
No.
overall, if we look at, as you say, a 10-year cycle, there's usually a big increase in and that's the gamble, isn't it? That's the gamble.
It is the gamble, but again, it's security.
Yeah. Now, I remember selling houses in 1991, 92, and then people could well have dipped into negative equity for a short period.
Yeah.
And if they still own the house, they're certainly not in negative. Because, I mean, I remember selling houses at £60,000 in Walthamstow, house compared to flats, because flats dropped to 50 and houses dropped to 60, 2-bedroom houses. A house in Walthamstow today is 600 grand, the average 2-bedroom house.
Flown, absolutely
Yeah,
flown. So if you look at, what's that, 40 years?
No.
30 years?
30 years.
30 years,
Yeah.
as you say, you put a nought on it.
Yeah.
You know,
Roughly, yeah.
that's
And I always do that, and I look back, and if you go back over, if you go back prior to that 25 years, a house in Walthamstow was probably somewhere in the region of about 2,500 to 4,000 quid. So it's about right.
I think the word negative equity is.
It's not been bandied around this time, has
No,
it?
it hasn't. No, it hasn't.
Even though it's 5% drop, no one's mentioned it, have they?
And I don't think it's as big a word as it sounds, to be fair. Unless you get into circumstances that you need to move, you just stay put.
You
Stay put. And also, going back to renting, the demand's so high now. I think.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I speak to quite a lot of agents, in my field, because I like to keep my finger on the pulse. And I believe for every property that comes on the market now, there's probably 20 to 25 viewings on it.
Yeah, but why?
People are buying later.
Okay, all right.
Later in life.
But that's a recent phenomenon.
Yeah.
I mean, I've noticed that in the last year, rents have really jumped substantially. So there's a reason for that. I've got my idea, but just get your take on it, really. I think it's twofold.
I don't know. It's because if you look at what's been banding out there at the moment, that property has come down 5%.
Yeah.
That makes it a good time to buy.
So if people are thinking this is not a good time to buy, let's go and rent somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's creating more demand.
Absolutely.
At the same time, is the supply is diminishing because landlords can't afford the mortgages because their rents have gone up, their rates have gone up, and they can't put up their rents by the amount it's gone up in the mortgage to counteract it. So they're selling rather than buying. So you've got a diminishing supply of rentals at the same time as demand jumps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So there's a twofold thing there, and I think that's probably what's driving it. And I put myself here. If I was a first time buyer today and thinking, do you know what, I'm going to put my plans on hold for a little while and go and rent somewhere. That's one of the reasons why Jason and my stepson and his family moved in with us, because to go and get rented accommodation, it was going to cost them a lot more than they were expecting, and the supply chain was so tight. It was trying to find something that they could actually rent, that they wanted to live in, because there's lots they don't want to live in. There's a lot of dumps out there.
Absolutely.
And that comes down to another point about renting is the quality of the stock.
Yeah. And we know the market is a little bit tame at the moment, for a better word. And I think if you are putting a spin on it, if you are looking to purchase something, you can get a good, if you negotiate hard.
I think there's a little bit of deals. I think there's a bit of flexibility, but I don't think people are desperate enough at the moment. But here's the thing, right? And this really comes down to nailing it. If someone really is in that point of, am I going to rent somewhere? Am I going to buy?
Yeah.
It's the quality of stock that you'll be looking at. So just say, for instance, someone can afford 400 grand, right?
Yep.
Because the average first-time buyer is probably what, 250 to 400?
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range?
Maybe 350, 250, 350.
350, right.
Yeah.
So let's take 350.
Yeah.
So 350 buys you a nice house in Medway, for example, right?
Yeah.
We're in an area called Medway, which covers the Medway towns: Rochester, Strood, Gillingham, Chatham. You're talking about the peninsula, the Hoo Peninsula,
yeah,
and bordering Maidstone and Gravesend. So 350,000 buys you probably a nice.
It's going to buy you a nice 3-bed semi with a garage on the side, which, as you spoke about earlier, that you can extend.
That's it. So the problem is, and this is where the issue arises, they predominantly weren't bought by buy-to-let investors.
No.
They would buy your traditional 2 up, 2 down, the terraced houses in the cheaper areas because they could make them work financially rather than a 3-bedroom semi.
Get a better yield.
It comes down to yield, yeah. So therefore, the stock, if you're going to rent somewhere, is unlikely to find something. You're more likely to find an accidental landlord that has a semi. Do you know what? We might keep this and buy our next property and turn that into a buy-to-let because we don't want to sell it. That type of landlord you might find, but they're few and far between, aren't they?
These days they are,
So the stock levels, if you're renting, and that's what Jason found, were atrocious.
Yeah.
For a good quality, comparable £350,000 property, and that was the issue. You could find a nice flat like these purpose-built blocks, but not many of the nice houses are bought to let out.
No, in a nice road, decent road, or
So that could actually kibosh someone into renting and saying, "Well, I've got to buy anyway." So we'll change that.
Yeah.
So I think that's that's a lot to digest today, which will lead us nicely into the next one, which we'll do next week, which will be about first-time buyers and the pitfalls of actually trying to find something to buy, because just as you might have a struggle to find something to rent that's a good quality, you might find the same problem with buying, and we're going to go all into the ins and outs of what to look for, where to look for stuff, and putting yourself in the best position to buy something. So that's next week's episode. So any final thoughts?
No, if you've got any comments,
put the comments
put them in the box below. Don't forget to subscribe.
And like the video.
Yeah, absolutely, because we are going to continue and get our knowledge out there.
Yeah. And if you know anybody who's thinking of buying, or they're thinking they've got the dilemma of renting, or they're just generally interested in all about property, share the link, share the love. We'd love to build this channel into a substantial channel, and we only do that with your help.
Yeah.
But anyway.
In the meantime, cheers, Paul.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.
And we'll see you next week.
Thank you.